The balance of power in the Western Hemisphere has been suddenly and silently rewritten. It is no longer about surface ships or visible fighters. For the first time, China and Russia have united their most secret and lethal capabilities, submarine warfare, to establish an unofficial nuclear shield in the deep waters of Venezuela. This action, which the Pentagon calls the most serious violation of the Monroe Doctrine in decades, signals a new phase of confrontation. The Caribbean, once an American backyard, has become the stage for a submarine Cold War, where silence is the greatest threat. The world watches. Is America about to lose control of its own waters? What began as superficial tensions has escalated into an existential threat. The confirmed presence of Russian nuclear-powered attack submarines of the Akula class and, more worryingly, the sighting of a Chinese ballistic missile submarine of the Jin class, Type 094, operating in coordination with the Venezuelan Navy, creates an existential dilemma for the U.S. The Pentagon has raised the alert level to Defense Readiness Condition 3, Increased Force Readiness, and the Southern Command, has mobilized the USS Virginia, a state-of-the-art nuclear-powered attack submarine, to the region. The confrontation is now silent, deep, and potentially catastrophic. This detailed script will dissect the submarine deterrence strategy of Beijing and Moscow, the audacity of Caracas, and the immediate consequences of this new naval reality. We will explore how Russia and China are using Venezuela as a safe harbor for their blue water fleets, and why the Monroe Doctrine, the pillar of American foreign policy for more than 2 centuries, is now on the verge of collapse. We will evaluate the escalation scenarios, from the fiber optic cable incident to the sonar information war, and what this means for global security. Prepare to understand the most audacious strategic maneuver on the geopolitical chessboard of the 21st century. It is a move that forces Washington to make an agonizing decision: accept the erosion of its supremacy naval, or risk a direct military confrontation with nuclear powers. Join us to decipher the complexities of this critical juncture, where diplomatic rhetoric has turned into silent torpedoes. The presence of attack and ballistic missile submarines from nuclear powers in Caribbean waters is not just a provocation. It is a paradigm shift in naval warfare. Venezuela is being used as a submarine sanctuary to undermine U.S. maritime security. The deepest threat lies in the nature of the mobilized assets. Russian Akula-class submarines, Shuka-B, known for being extremely quiet and capable of carrying long-range cruise missiles, the Akulas represent a direct threat to U.S. navigation and coastal bases. Their primary mission is anti-submarine warfare, and intelligence gathering. The presence of an Akula in the Caribbean forces the U.S. Navy to divert significant resources to submarine hunting. Chinese Jin-class submarines, Type 094. The sighting of a ballistic missile submarine, is the highest escalation factor. The Type 094 is designed to carry JL-2 intercontinental ballistic missiles, capable of reaching the continental U.S. The presence of a Chinese SSBN in the Caribbean establishes a second strike capability from a forward position, reducing U.S. warning time and forcing a complete reevaluation of its anti-missile defense. The Venezuelan nuclear shield. Venezuela, in turn, offers logistical support and, crucially, political cover for the presence. The Maduro regime insists that the presence is for defense, exercises, and protection against imperialist aggression, transforming its territorial waters into a diplomatic shield for nuclear operations. The U.S. response has been immediate and discreet, focused on high-tech assets. USS Virginia nuclear-powered attack submarine 774, one of the most advanced attack submarines in the world. The Virginia has been mobilized to the region. Its mission is silent hunting, using cutting-edge sonar technology to track and monitor Russian and Chinese submarines. The confrontation between the Virginia and the Akula Jin is a modern Cold War clash of titans. Submarine information warfare. The Pentagon is using P-8, Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, and passive surveillance sonars, sound surveillance system, to try to map the submarine presence. However, Sino-Russian coordination is making the task extremely difficult, creating sonar blind spots. If you value the analysis that uncovers the truth behind the headlines, This is the time to click the subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next in this crisis. The decision by Moscow and Beijing to orchestrate a joint submarine deployment is a manifestation of their shared ambition to challenge U.S. hegemony and reshape the world order. The Advanced Deterrence Doctrine. Russia and China are establishing advanced deterrence in the Caribbean. By placing second-strike nuclear assets so close to the U.S., they force Washington to divert resources from the Indo-Pacific and Eastern Europe, relieving pressure on their own borders. It is a high-risk strategic distraction strategy. The credibility crisis of the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine, which defines the Western Hemisphere as the exclusive sphere of influence of the U.S., is collapsing. The presence of a Chinese SSBN and a Russian SSN, operating with impunity, is the final proof that the doctrine is a paper tiger. The failure to prevent this power projection is globally seen as a sign of weakness and erosion of American authority. The secret logistics factor. Venezuela offers more than just political cover. Intelligence reports suggest that China is secretly funding the expansion of Venezuelan naval facilities, such as the Puerto Cabello base, to allow for the refueling and maintenance of submarines, creating an advanced support base for long-term operations. China and Russia exploit the U.S. submarine dilemma. Asymmetric cost. Maintaining an SSBN in the Caribbean is a high cost for China, but it forces the U.S. to spend billions on anti-missile defense systems and the mobilization of a high-cost submarine hunting fleet. The asymmetry of costs favors the aggressor. Sonar information warfare. The presence of multiple submarines from different nations creates complex background noise for U.S. sonars. China and Russia are using the opportunity to map the acoustic signatures of U.S. ships and submarines, turning the Caribbean into a real-time electronic and acoustic warfare laboratory. If this analysis made you think, show your support. Leave a like and share this video with a friend who needs to understand the gravity of this crisis. This helps us bring this critical information to more people. The submarine crisis creates more dangerous escalation scenarios than any surface confrontation, as miscalculation can be fatal and invisible. Scenario 1. The fiber optic cable incident. A Russian or Chinese submarine, intentionally or by navigation error, damages a vital submarine fiber optic cable connecting the U.S. to South America. The incident is denied, but the communication disruption and panic in financial markets force a military response. Additional detail. The Pentagon considers the act a declaration of economic war, and the U.S. Navy sends unmanned underwater vehicles to inspect the cables, increasing the risk of an underwater confrontation with adversary submarines. Scenario 2. The capture of an unmanned underwater vehicle, UUV. A U.S. surveillance UUV, such as the LBS AUV, is captured by a Russian or Chinese submarine in international waters, but near the Venezuelan exclusion zone. The capture is an intelligence coup and a direct challenge to U.S. technological sovereignty. Additional detail. The incident is filmed and released by Russian-Chinese state media, publicly humiliating the U.S. and forcing an aggressive diplomatic response, but without clear military options. Scenario 3. The accidental collision and the nuclear crisis. A U.S. attack submarine and a Russian or Chinese submarine accidentally collide in the depths. The incident is kept secret for hours, but the loss of contact with a nuclear asset raises the crisis to the level of Cuban Missile Crisis 2.0. Additional detail. The collision forces the direct intervention of the leaders of the three powers, with the risk of an accidental launch of ballistic missiles due to the loss of command and control. Scenario 4. Tactical withdrawal and acceptance of the new reality. The U.S., recognizing the risk of nuclear escalation, opts for a tactical withdrawal, accepting the new reality that naval superiority in the Caribbean is no longer guaranteed. Additional detail. The withdrawal is accompanied by economic concessions to Venezuela, sanctions relief, in exchange for the promise that the SSBNs will not make a permanent visit. However, China and Russia establish a permanent logistical support agreement with Venezuela, ensuring future access. The submarine crisis is the final test for the Monroe Doctrine and the harbinger of a new world order. The legacy of the doctrine. The presence of a Chinese SSBN is the first serious technological and military violation of this doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine, which for 200 years defined the Western Hemisphere as the exclusive sphere of influence of the U.S., is collapsing. The presence of a Chinese SSBN and a Russian SSN, operating with impunity, is the final proof that the doctrine is a paper tiger. The failure to prevent this power projection is globally seen as a sign of weakness and erosion of American authority. The signal to the world. The success of China and Russia in establishing this military capability in Venezuela sends an unequivocal signal. They can project military power anywhere. This encourages other countries to challenge U.S. hegemony in their own regions. The new axis of power. China and Russia are using Venezuela as a foothold to redefine the rules of the global game. The crisis in the Caribbean is a microcosm of the transition to a multipolar world, where military and economic power is no longer exclusive to a single nation. The real battle in the Caribbean is being fought in silence, in the domain of acoustics. China and Russia are using the presence of their submarines to conduct acoustic information warfare against the U.S. The goal is simple. Map the U.S. submarine sensor network, identify the acoustic signatures of American ships and submarines, and, crucially, test the effectiveness of their own noise reduction technologies. The Chinese Type 094 submarine, although not the quietest, is being used as a noise decoy to distract U.S. sonars, while the notoriously quieter Russian Akulas carry out surveillance and data collection missions. This coordination is a nightmare for U.S. Navy planners, as the detection of one submarine does not mean the detection of all. The doctrine of silence, which values invisibility, is the new weapon of choice in the Caribbean, and Venezuela is its testing ground. The presence of nuclear submarines, especially an SSBN, has an immediate and profound economic impact. The risk of a nuclear conflict, even an accidental one, raises the risk premium for maritime transport and cargo insurance. The Yucatan Strait and the Panama Canal, vital routes for global trade, are now under the shadow of a submarine threat. Energy and logistics companies are reevaluating their routes and costs, which could lead to an increase in the prices of consumer goods in the US and Europe. China and Russia are using the military threat to exert indirect economic pressure on the US, forcing them to spend more on defense and accept the new geopolitical reality. The US intelligence community is in a state of shock. The ability of China and Russia to move nuclear assets so close to American territory without immediate detection is a failure of historical proportions. The focus now turns to Cuba. Unconfirmed reports suggest that Russia may be reactivating the Lord's base in Cuba or seeking an agreement for a technical stop for its submarines. The presence of a Chinese SSBN in the Caribbean, with the possibility of Cuban logistical support, would be the point of no return for the Monroe Doctrine, forcing a high-level military or diplomatic response. The choice of Venezuela as a submarine operations base is not accidental. The Venezuelan continental shelf, with its variable depths and complex topography, offers an ideal environment for submarine concealment. China and Russia are exploiting the acoustic shadow zones created by this geography to evade detection by U.S. passive sonars. Furthermore, Venezuela is granting deep-water oil and gas exploration rights to Chinese and Russian companies, which serves as a legal cover for the presence of oceanographic research vessels that are, in fact, mapping the seabed for safe submarine routes. This is a hybrid warfare strategy, where science and economics mask military intent. The Caribbean islands, many of which are historical U.S. allies, are caught in the middle of this crisis. The presence of nuclear assets increases the risk of environmental accidents and the threat of conflict. Tourism, the backbone of their economies, is collapsing. China and Russia are using this pressure to offer humanitarian and security aid to the islands, in exchange for agreements on port access and intelligence information. This creates a diplomatic wedge between the U.S. and its regional allies, forcing them to choose between immediate economic security and historical loyalty. The submarine crisis is turning into a regional humanitarian and diplomatic crisis. The submarine crisis has generated a bipartisan reaction of shock and indignation in the U.S. Congress. There is a growing call for a Caribbean Sovereignty Act that would require an immediate military response to any presence of nuclear assets from non-hemispheric powers. The political pressure on the president is immense, with opponents demanding the immediate expulsion of the submarines, even if it means a risk of escalation. The crisis is being used as a turning point in foreign policy, forcing the U.S. to redefine its defense posture and allocate massive resources to anti-submarine warfare. Anti-submarine warfare in the Atlantic. The Sino-Russian strategy in the Caribbean aligns with the Gerasimov Doctrine, which advocates for hybrid warfare, where the line between war and peace is blurred. The presence of nuclear submarines is a form of non-linear deterrence. It is not an invasion, but a constant existential threat. Russia and China are using Venezuela as a laboratory to test the U.S.'s ability to respond to a threat that does not fit traditional models of warfare. Submarine warfare is the purest form of hybrid warfare, as it is invisible, silent, and potentially devastating. Brazil, the largest regional power and neighbor of Venezuela, is in a delicate position. The presence of nuclear assets in the Caribbean and the potential militarization of the northern border force Brazil to reevaluate its defense policy. China and Russia are offering border security cooperation to Brazil, which could be a way to extend their influence southward. Brazil becomes a diplomatic pressure point where the U.S. and the Sino-Russian axis compete for influence. The submarine crisis in the Caribbean has direct ramifications for Brazilian security and foreign policy. The inability of U.S. intelligence to predict or detect the coordinated arrival of the Russian and Chinese nuclear submarines is a failure of historical proportions. This raises questions about the effectiveness of surveillance systems in the Atlantic and the penetration of Russian and Chinese intelligence into U.S. communication and defense networks. The crisis is not just military, but a crisis of confidence in the U.S.'s ability to protect its own hemisphere. The need for a radical reform in the intelligence community is a central theme in Congress. The presence of a Chinese SSBN in the Caribbean forces the U.S. to reconsider its own nuclear deterrence doctrine. The ability of an adversary to launch a second strike attack from such a close position drastically reduces reaction time and increases the risk of miscalculation. This requires a nuclear posture review and a massive investment in early warning and anti-missile defense systems. The submarine crisis is ultimately a nuclear deterrence crisis. The crisis in the Caribbean marks the beginning of a new and dangerous submarine arms race in the Atlantic. The U.S. will be forced to accelerate the production of its Virginia-class attack submarines and invest in new detection technologies. China and Russia, in turn, will continue to refine their evasion tactics and seek new port access agreements in Latin America. The Atlantic, which for decades was considered an American lake, is becoming a high-tech submarine battlefield. Colombia, a strategic U.S. ally and neighbor of Venezuela, is on maximum alert. The presence of nuclear submarines on its maritime borders represents a direct threat to its security. Colombia is intensifying military cooperation with the U.S. Southern Command, allowing the use of its air and naval bases for patrol and surveillance missions. This cooperation, however, is seen by Venezuela as an act of aggression, increasing regional tension. Colombia becomes a crucial foothold for the U.S. response, but also a potential target for Sino-Russian retaliation. The Caribbean Sea is not just a body of water. It is a critical choke point for global trade and a vital artery for U.S. energy security. The presence of hostile nuclear assets in this region threatens the free flow of commerce, including oil and gas shipments from the Gulf of Mexico. This strategic importance elevates the crisis from a regional dispute to a matter of global economic and security concern. The Sino-Russian move is a direct challenge to the U.S.'s ability to guarantee the security of its maritime approaches, a cornerstone of its global power projection. The presence of nuclear submarines in the Caribbean is a geopolitical watershed. China and Russia have shown that they are willing to use their most secret naval power to challenge U.S. hegemony in its own hemisphere. The Caribbean is no longer a backyard. It is the new center of the world, where the rules of the 21st century are being written. The crisis is no longer about Venezuela. It is about the future of U.S. global authority. The presence of the submarine nuclear shield is a test of determination that Washington cannot ignore. If China and Russia manage to establish a permanent naval presence and break the blockade, the Monroe Doctrine will be dead, and the multipolar world will have won. The big question is, Does the United States have the strategy to combat Sino-Russian submarine naval power without risking an all-out war? We want to know your opinion. Which of the 4 escalation scenarios do you think is most likely? And more importantly, if you were the commander-in-chief, what would be your next tactical move to defuse this crisis without losing credibility? Leave your most insightful analysis in the comments, share this video so more people understand the danger, and subscribe to follow the unfolding of this crisis in real time. The future of global stability depends on your voice.